Well, hey, what's going on, Hope City Church? How you guys doing this morning? You guys awake? Come on. Come on. Hey, my name is Justin. I'm the youth pastor here at Hope City Church. Hey, I know we say this all the time, but we really mean it, and that's why we say it all the time. Thank you so much that you just for choosing to be with us here on a Sunday morning. We know that you really could be anywhere, and you chose to be with us, and so we're just so grateful for that. I hope you guys had an amazing Thanksgiving. I know I did. Anybody, just show a hand. Anybody having an awesome Thanksgiving? Come on. Yeah, Thanksgiving, man. It's such a good holiday. So me and my wife, we drove down to Fort Lauderdale. Her side of the family, they live down in Fort Lauderdale. And let me tell you this. You have never lived until you have celebrated and been a part of a Puerto Rican Thanksgiving. It is like, it's on a whole nother level. Let me tell you, they know how to celebrate. My wife's side of the family, they know how to throw down, right? And so I'm telling you, the food doesn't stop coming, right? Because here's the deal. This is how it works. If grandma offers you more food, you don't turn it down. Because if you turn it down, that's disrespectful, and then they're going to talk about you. Oh, that's the one that turns down the food. Right, and so I eat one big plate and I'm full, right? And then grandma offers food and you're like, well, I mean, grandma's offering it, so I might as well eat it, right? Before you know it, you're 3 plates in and you're blaming grandma, but really it's you, right? No, grandma, no more, right? And so, man, Puerto Rican Thanksgiving, I had so much fun. I love getting to be a part of that family. It's a ton of fun. But hey, if you're new here, maybe haven't been here in a few weeks, I want to catch you guys up to speed. We are in the middle of a book study. We're studying the book of Philippians, and we're in a series that we've titled Multiple Choice. And so if you've missed any of the messages, I just want to encourage you, go find them on the podcast because you need these messages in your life. They're going to bring you life. They're going to rejuvenate you. They're going to refresh you. So go get on the podcast, listen to those messages. They're really good. And so this morning, I get the privilege to close out the series. And so before we get into it, I want to ask you guys a question. It's a little bit of an awkward question. I get it. But man, how many of you guys know one person that they just worry way too much? I mean, it's just worst case scenario, like from the jump. Some of you are like, yeah, it's the person next to me, right? Don't do that. Don't make it awkward up in here this morning. But can I be honest with you? I think that sometimes I fall into that category way more than I'd like to admit. I get super stressed out whenever I take my daughter to the park. It's not that I don't like taking her to the park. I love taking my daughter to the park. It's so much fun. It's more so that I'm convinced that the park is literally the most dangerous place on the entire planet. I mean, I know it looks peaceful, but listen, it's like a post-apocalyptic society where only the strong survive. You don't believe me? Watch. Just sit back and watch. It's like, what is going on? It's like they've created like there's a hierarchy. What? Right? And I'm watching it, and my 2.5-year-old, she doesn't know it, but she thinks that she's the strongest. And you should see her, right? Like she finds the biggest slide that she can possibly find, and she's like, I want to go on that, right? And I love that about her. I love that she sets out to conquer the biggest thing she can find, right? I love that. I love that she's so bold. What I don't love is I don't love when little Billy, who's like 4 times her size, comes running past her with absolutely no regard for human life whatsoever. Listen, I've never fought a 5-year-old, but I'd be lying if I told you I ain't never thought about it. And I just get so anxious. There's 2 types of dads, right? There's the one dad who's like chilling on the bench, not a care in the world, right? And then there's the other dad, and he's like, and that's me, right? She goes up the slide, I go up the slide. She goes down the slide, I go down the slide, right? There's something in me that's like, I just don't want my little girl to get hurt. And if I'm right there, then maybe she won't get hurt. And my wife, she makes fun of me. She's like, you just need to calm down. And I'm like, I can't. I'm the anxious parent. I don't want anything to happen to my daughter, right? And it's funny because she spends every day at preschool on the big playground with the big kids, and nothing ever happens. But I'm the parent that worries. I can't help it. Here's what I know. I know that every single one of us has something that we worry about. And it's not just parents. Like maybe you're an introvert, right? And maybe you worry that the extroverted youth pastor is going to get up here on the platform and he's going to say to you, hey, why don't you go ahead and turn to your neighbor? Right? But here's the deal. I'm way more original than that. And so here's what I'd love to ask. Would you just turn to your neighbor and just give them a big old hug? No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. Introverts are like, that's it, I'm out. I knew it was that kind of church. Maybe you're the person that climbs into bed at night, gets all comfy, right? And like right before you fall asleep. Did I lock the door? I think I locked the door. But what if I didn't? And what if somebody breaks in? And what if they steal the dog? What if they steal me? So you go you get out of bed, right? And you go down and you lock the door. And it's like, okay, wait, did I really lock it? Right? Like maybe you're that person, or maybe you're the person that just got the news from Dr. Google. Good old WebMD, right? Men, it's man flu. It's terminal. You don't know how long you're going to make it. Right? But ladies laugh, but it's serious. You don't know the struggle. Man flu is real. Here's what I know. I know that we might not all worry about the same thing, but every single one of us in here worries about something. And so today I want to talk about a topic that sometimes isn't like glorified in public. Like sometimes it's a topic that feels a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes it feels a little bit awkward, but you'd be surprised by how many people actually wrestle and struggle with this thing. And so the thing that I'm talking about is anxiety. I was doing some research on that this past week, and here's what I discovered. I discovered that anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the United States. That nearly 50 million people will experience the effects of a panic attack. It's just feeling like an elephant is just on your chest, right? And your chest tightens up, and it gets hard to breathe, and you get short of breath, right? And then you get dizzy, and you get lightheaded, and you just feel so overwhelmed. 50 million people. I thought, man, that's scary. But then I read something else that I thought was scarier. It said that the average child today exhibits the same level of anxiety as the average psychiatric patient in the 1950s. That's our children. Those are the teenagers that I get to lead week in, week out. What I realize about anxiety is that it has no prejudice, it has no bias. It doesn't care if you're 70 or if you're 7. It comes in all shapes and sizes, and it doesn't always look like you think it might look like. But very often, it shows up as this unnerving feeling inside, and it entertains worst case scenarios. It demands forcefully that you go down the rabbit trail of what if. And we all have our what ifs, right? Like what if? Like, what if I don't close this sale? What if I don't get the bonus? What if this new job, this new endeavor, what if it doesn't work out? Right? What if my marriage doesn't work out? What if we lose the car? What if we lose the house? What if my kids? What if I mess them up? Right? I probably will a little bit, right? But what if they make a mistake that they end up regretting? What if? The what ifs are endless. They could just go on and on and on and on and on. And every single one of us, we have a what if. And so I want to ask you this question this morning. I want you to think about it in your mind as I ask it. What's your what if? We all have one. Even Christians do. We grow up, in church, right? And we hear this thing that Christians are supposed to have peace. Right, we're supposed to live this life of peace. And what happens is when we don't have that peace, all of a sudden we think that the problem is us and the problem lies inside of us. And then what happens is we begin to feel guilty about our anxiety. And all of a sudden we find ourselves in this spiral, right, where we feel guilty, anxious, guilty, anxious. And all of that coming together, I tell you, it's enough to just make anybody feel anxious. Anybody. And so what I want to do today is I want to look at what the Apostle Paul says in his letter to the Philippians in chapter 4, because I think it gives us some tips to handle the anxiety in our life. And so you can follow along on the screens. You can grab the Bible that's in the seat. If you do, you can find that on page 804. And so here's the deal. Let me give you some background. If there's anybody in the Bible ever that understood anxiety, I would say that it was Paul. Because during his ministry, he received 39 lashes on 5 different occasions. He was beaten with rods on 3 different times. He has scars that bulge out like veins. He's been left for dead. He's been imprisoned, deserted by his friends and co-workers. He's been through shipwrecks, storms, and starvation. And while he sits in a Roman prison awaiting his trial before the Roman emperor, he writes this. Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 9. It says this. We're going to devour this in a big chunk, and then we're going to come back around and break it down. Here's what it says. It says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. And I think sometimes we can just find ourselves so overwhelmed, and we get so worked up with worry. And as I read this, I can't help but feel like Paul is saying to us the very same thing that my wife tells me when we're at the park and I'm getting all freaked out. I can't help but feel like the thing that Paul is telling us to do when we're anxious, when we're worried, I feel like he's saying, you just need to calm down. Now let's be real for a minute. How many of you know that when you're in a situation and emotions are charged up, the very last thing you should say to somebody is, calm down? Because come on, that's just going to make things way worse, right? It's going to heat up the situation. But honestly, I think we could all use a little bit of calm in our life. I think we could maybe calm down a little bit. And so what I want to do is I want to give you 4 practical things that will help you calm down the anxiety in your life. The first one is this: celebrate God's goodness. If you're taking notes, go ahead and write that down. Celebrate God's goodness. Paul says this in verse 4. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Paul says that if you want to calm the anxiety in your life, rejoice in the Lord. Okay. But what if that thing that I've been worried about happens, Paul? Okay. But what if my what if becomes a reality? And Paul is saying, yes, even if. See, I think Paul knew that we'd ask what if. That's why he says rejoice when? Always. Rejoice even if. Paul's saying rejoice even if you don't close on that sale. Even if you don't get that bonus. Even if the new business doesn't take off. Even if you don't feel like it. And that's hard. It's not easy. And what Paul is saying, he's saying, I'm not calling you to a feeling. I'm calling you to a decision. It's a decision to rejoice even if. And what I love is it's not a call to blind optimism. It's not this holy hoping for the best, right? It'll just all work out. I hope it'll all work out, right? It's not a call to rejoice in our own willpower, right? It's not a call to rejoice in our strength. What is it? It's a call to rejoice in who? The Lord, right? I love that because why? He's good. He's in control. Right? He's faithful. And we can rejoice when the circumstances around us aren't going the way we want them to. Right? When everything feels crazy, we can rejoice. Why? Because God is always good. Right? And he stays constant in the storm. When we rejoice because our source of that joy is actually found in God. We celebrate his goodness. That's what Paul did. Man, he's sitting in a prison. And he decided that even if he was sentenced to death, he was going to celebrate God's goodness. And I know that preaches well, but it's hard to live out, right? So this past week, I was at the National Youth Workers Convention in Tampa. It's just thousands of youth pastors I had the honor because of your generosity to get to go and be a part of that and get poured into. But man, I was heading over to a breakout session. And I reached down into my pocket to pull out my phone. And it was in that moment that I realized that my car keys were no longer attached to my waist. And in that moment, I wasn't thinking about God's goodness. I was thinking, if I don't find my keys, I'm not going to get home. And so I did what any logical person would do. I was like, well, let me go check the lost and found. Like maybe they found what I lost. And so I roll up to the lost and found, and I'm like, hey, I'm the youth pastor that loses stuff. Did you find my keys? And they were like, no keys turned in. And I'm like, So the next thing I do is I decide, okay, well, I need to retrace my steps. Where have I been? What have I done? Right? And so the next hour, I'm going to the bathroom. What bathrooms did I use? Okay, I use this one, and I use that one, and I use this one. Okay, so I go and I check those, and then I check the big room, and then I'm like calling the restaurant I had lunch at, and I'm like, hey, by chance did you find keys? And of course they say no. And so at this point, I've been searching for an hour. I've checked the lost and found booth downstairs. I've checked the lost and found booth upstairs. And I've searched everywhere. I've retraced my steps. And I haven't found my keys. And at this point, my anxiety is going straight through the roof. And the more I thought about it, the more anxious I got. And the reason is because the more we stare and focus at a problem, the bigger it gets. Right? We lock our focus and we set our focus on it. So finally, as a last-ditch effort, I go over to the lost and found, and I'm like, hey, it's me again. By chance, did you find keys? And she goes, keys? You mean these keys? And in that moment, here's literally what I did. Thank you, Jesus. Like I fell to my knees, raised my hands, and I celebrated God's goodness. I was like, you are good. Thank you. Hallelujah. But you know what I realized? That whether I found my keys or not, God's still good. Because God's goodness is not determined by our ability to see it or celebrate it. God is good always, no matter what, because that's who he is. It's a part of his identity. God is always good. I'm just convinced that sometimes we don't see it or we forget it. And I think what we need most is we just need a better understanding of God's goodness. Man, what if we knew that no matter what circumstance, no matter how bad it is, God would still be good. You see, I think that our anxiety decreases when our understanding of the Father increases. Man, if you knew how powerful he was. Man, if you knew that there is nothing above him. Man, if you knew that thrones were his footstools. Man, if you knew that God was sovereign, right? That he was just all powerful. It would change everything. And so we start by celebrating God's goodness. But Paul doesn't stop there. Look at what he says in verse 6. He just takes it up a notch, and it's that thing that gets people triggered. He says, do not be anxious about anything. Anything? But in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And then what? And then the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I want to dig into that statement, don't be anxious for anything. You see, when Paul says, don't be anxious for anything, he's not actually talking about the presence of anxiety, right? Like the presence of anxiety, that's all around us, right? I mean, just get on the freeway during rush hour, during snowbird season, and you get it, right? It's like this thing is packed. Anxiety, you feel it, right? Anxiety's all around us. That's unavoidable. What Paul is actually talking about is he's saying, don't be imprisoned by your anxiety, right? That's optional. That's a choice. And we can choose not to step into that trap. And I know, as somebody that actually struggles with anxiety, that's really hard to hear, because when you're in the midst of anxiety, it doesn't feel like you have an option. It doesn't feel like you chose it. I didn't choose this. I'm just stuck in it. It feels that way. It feels like you don't have an option. But what if you did have an option? What if the next time you found yourself in the presence of anxiety, instead of allowing it to imprison you, what if you stopped and you said, my circumstance might not be good, but God is. And because he is good, I'm going to turn to him and I'm going to ask him for help. That's the second point. Ask God for help. For some reason, asking for help is one of the hardest things that we have to do in life. I mean, it is for me. Like, it's just hard for me to ask for help. Like, I'm terrible at building IKEA furniture. My wife's way better at it. It takes me forever, but I won't ask for help. Nah, boo, I got this. 5 hours later, okay, you do it. Look at what Jesus says, Matthew 7:7. He says this. He says, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. What I love about what Jesus says here is that there's no uncertainty in his promise. There's no maybe. He says, ask, and it'll be given to you. Ask, and he listens, right? But I want you to notice this as well. I want you to notice the word ask, seek, and knock. These are all action words. And I wonder if what it means is that when we have something in our life that we need God to work in, I wonder if there's a responsibility on our part to bring it to him, right? If we should ask, right? And then if the ask doesn't work, man, I'm going to go seeking, right? And then I'm going to knock, right? You see, if it's worth worrying about, it's worth praying about. Man, if God really is good and God really is in control by the way he is, man, let's just take those things and let's take that time that we would have spent worrying and let's replace that time with prayer. And let's just take that thing that we're worrying about and bring it to God. Well, I prayed once and nothing really happened. Listen, y'all, that's like me saying, hey, I went to the gym one time. I ain't lose any weight. I ain't going back to that place. When you have something that you need God to work in, when you have something in your life and you're like, God, I just need you to breathe life into this, right? Ask, seek, knock. St. Augustine said this, and I love it. He said, pray as though everything depended on God, and work as though everything depended on you. Listen, seek God as if you have lost your keys at a youth convention and you ain't getting home if you don't find them. Seek after him, right? I want to know, what have you been asking God for? And what have you been doing to seek that out in your life? My motto has always been this: I'm going to do whatever I can in the natural, right? I'm going to do what I can. And I'm going to trust God to do what God does. I'm going to trust him with the supernatural. God, I've done all I can do. You've got to do the rest. I also think that sometimes Jesus answers our prayers in a way that we don't expect. And because he answers our prayers and it doesn't look like we thought it would look like, we miss it. Like, what if the answer to God's prayers is right around this room? Right? What if it's the people right here at Hope City Church? Right? You see, there's a reason why Jesus said that the church is the light of the world, right? Like, what if the thing that you need is found when you get in a connect group and you decide, I'm going to take my mask off. I'm going to be authentic. I'm going to be real, right? And then somebody else says, you go through that, I go through that. And all of a sudden you find mutual ground. And all of a sudden you're like, you know what? We're going to do this thing together. We're going to chase after this together, right? All of a sudden that thing that you've been praying about, God starts working it. What if the thing that you've been praying about, what if the healing and the breakthrough is actually going to come when you decide to get onto the dream team, right? And you start serving and you start rubbing shoulders with people and you're working towards a purpose and you're in the kids ministry and you're on the hospitality team, right? And you're just getting after it. And all of a sudden you start to notice that there's things moving and shaking in your life and God is good and you're establishing some relationships that are changing the game. I think sometimes we just miss it because we don't think that that's what it's going to look like. But it does. And I also know that there's somebody here this morning, man, whenever anxiety comes knocking on the door, you guys ever had somebody knock on your door in the middle of the day and you weren't expecting anybody and you're like, I'm not going to answer that. I don't want to buy anything, right? There used to be these kids that would come knock on my door and they would try to sell me like, what are those things that spin? I can't remember them. Fidget spinners. Hey, sir, you want to buy some fidget spinners? No, I don't. Anxiety comes knocking on the door. We open it, we let him in. And let me tell you, when anxiety comes in, he's going to stay a while. He's going to talk your ear off. You won't be able to get him home. Get him out. Might as well blow up the air mattress. He's going to stay. That's what anxiety does. It makes itself comfortable. So the next time anxiety and worry and fear and all these things come knocking, you know what we can do? We can ask God for help. We can say, you know what, Jesus? I don't really feel like answering the door, so I'm just going to need you to answer it, right? And so instead of lashing out in fear, we look up in faith and say, God, you handle this because I can't do this. So you ask God for help, and when you do, here's the important part. You've got to leave your concerns with him. So a few months ago, the check engine light came on in my car. So I don't know if you knew this, but the purpose of the check engine light is to let you know that there's something wrong with your car. So I did what every responsible adult does. I ignored it. Don't judge me. I know some of y'all driving around right now with the check engine light on in your car. So after ignoring it for a few weeks, my car started acting weird. Surprise, didn't even see it coming, right? And so I'm driving this thing, and it just starts jerking, right? And it's coming out of like from a complete stop. And I'm pressing on the gas, but it ain't got no go. It's not going. And I'm like, I don't understand what's happening. And so finally I'm like, this is not good. I'm going to take this thing to a mechanic. And so I take it over to this mechanic, and I leave it with him. You know what I don't do? I don't offer to stay and help him fix it. I don't hover around his shop, asking him questions. Hey, what's that right there? Are you sure? Right? That's not how the relationship between the mechanic and the client works. You leave it with them, and they fix it. It's the same thing with God. We leave our concerns with him. He doesn't need our help. He doesn't need our counsel. He doesn't need our advice. You see, I think the reason we don't get this peace that transcends everything, this peace that Paul talks about, because we give God our concerns, and then when it doesn't get done or fixed as fast as we want it to, we're like, okay, I'm just going to take that back. I think I could do better with that. And then we wonder why we don't have this peace, and it's because we're not actually leaving it with him. We don't delegate to God. We give it. This is yours. Take it. This isn't mine. Take it. Last but not least, Paul says this. He says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. You see, we got to celebrate God's goodness. We've got to ask God for help persistently. Ask, seek, knock. Don't give up. Keep asking. We got to leave our concerns with him. Don't hover around. Just give it to him. And then we have to meditate on good things. Calm. You need to calm down. A man named Dr. Walter Calvert did some research on anxiety. And he discovered that 40% of the things that we worry about never happen. Even more than that, 30% of the things we worry about are things from the past that we really have no control over at this point because we don't have a time machine, right? Like we can't fix that, can't change that. And it gets better. Apparently 12% are worries from like unwarranted health paranoias, too much time on WebMD, right? And then check this out, another 10% are actually just petty. We just get worked up over silly things like when you're doing 75 and a 70 and the guy behind you is riding you on the highway and you're like, what is wrong with you? Right? And you get all worked up. I do that. I don't know. Maybe you don't. But, right, it's petty. And the man is like, calm down. And I'm like, I can't. He's riding me. I don't understand. You know, too often, we just allow that 8% to just walk right into our minds. And we let our thoughts run wild. And man, that 8% can mess us up if we let it. Man, that 8%, it takes up rent-free space in our minds. I want you to look at what Paul says about our thoughts in 2 Corinthians 10:5. He says, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God. Meaning if there's anything that's being spoken or being thought that goes against who God says he is, we demolish that, right? What else does he do? He says, we take captive every thought. And what do we do with it? We make it obedient to Christ. When you go through an airport, there's a reason why they have such tight security, right? If the wrong thing gets through, it could be disastrous, right? And what happens if they find something that's not allowed? Like if you just so happen to leave the water bottle in your bag, right? Like they take that, and if you're unlucky, sometimes they take you too, and you and the security guy, you get really close. That happened to me once in Detroit. It was really uncomfortable. Paul is telling us to set up TSA in our minds and scan every single thought before letting it get through. Is it true? Is it noble? Is it right? Is it pure? Is it lovely? Is it admirable? Let these things serve as a filter. And I know, listen, you're not going to get this right every time. It's not about perfection. It's about the process, right? You try, you make an effort. If the answer is no, then don't let that through TSA. Sorry. Not today. It's not going to work. Here's the deal. You can't control your circumstances. And some things are just out of our control. But you know what we can control? We can control what we think about them. A mentor of mine used to tell me that whenever you take something bad out of your life, you have to replace it with something good. Because if not, the bad's just going to come right back. One of the ways we can do that in our lives, one of the ways that we can meditate on good things, is we replace our worry with gratitude. We actually set aside time in our day where we intentionally think about the good things in our life. Okay, for 30 minutes here, when I'm driving home from work, I'm going to think about all the good things in my life. I'm just going to think about them. I'm going to be intentional about that. Man, I want to encourage you to make it a daily habit to talk to your friends and your family about the things you're grateful for. Man, when I get anxious about the future, gratitude helps me to focus on the present. What are you grateful for? Write it down. Put it somewhere you can see it, because you're prone to forget. Because life just punches you in the face and you go, we got to keep it in front of us. If you're here this morning and you hear this message and you're like, it's not that simple. You can't just fix this with an acronym. It doesn't work that way. If you're here this morning, you just feel overwhelmed by this. I get it. Like I've lived it. In the beginning of the year, I was having a really hard time mentally. I knew something was wrong because I was way more stressed than usual. I was worrying way more than I usually do. And there were some days where it took everything I had just to get out of bed. And finally, I decided I just got to make an appointment, because this isn't right. I'm seeking God. I'm devoted. And something's off. And so I made that appointment. And I went in and I had an evaluation. And at the end of the evaluation, I sat down with the doctor and she walked me through what was going on. And she explained to me that what I was experiencing was actually the effects of a mental illness that I had. And I didn't realize I had it. I didn't realize I was struggling with it. And I left her office that day. And I wish I could tell you that I was like, yeah, you know what? I got this. I wasn't. I left the office that day and I was so overwhelmed by my what if. What if people think I'm not fit to be a pastor? What if my friends look at me differently? There goes that crazy guy. He cray. What if? So after that, I decided, man, let me fix it. Maybe if I diet, maybe if I do some CrossFit, yeah, maybe that'll work. Maybe that'll fix it. And it did for a few months, but then it caught up to me. And I found myself at that place again, and I realized, you know what? I can't do this on my own. I'd been praying, and what I felt God saying is, Justin, you just need to get some extra help. The reason I share this with you is because I know that anxiety is real. I know that depression is real. And I know that sometimes there's not a simple fix to it. Sometimes your depression's not a result of a lack of devotion. And the best thing you can do after you've prayed is you gotta pray. It's just take it and give it to God. See, as somebody that's been through it, I get it. But here's what I also know, and I'm not willing to let go of this. I know that walking through anxiety and depression and worry is so much better when you're walking through it with Jesus. Look what he says in Matthew 11:28. He says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. This is the heart of Jesus, that he is for those that are weary. He is for those that are burdened. He is for those that are overwhelmed with anxiety and depression. He's for those people that are messed up and don't have it together. He's for those people like me who are just a little bit rough around the edges. And with open arms, he invites us in and he offers us rest. He offers us that peace that Paul talks about that just transcends everything. He says, come to me and I will give it to you. He offers us comfort from the worries of this life. Regardless of what you're facing, I want you to know that there is hope in Jesus and you are not alone. Look around. You've got the church family. We're here with you. We stand with you. We'll walk through it with you. We've got you. And not only that, but Jesus is walking with you. So the next time you're tempted to worry, hit pause and calm down. Celebrate God's goodness. Ask him for help. Leave your concerns with him. And then meditate on good things. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again. Rejoice.